This is Paul Johnson with the New Frontiers. Now, as we're cutting this episode, a very exciting thing is happening, and that is that Donald Trump is on his way to Egypt to cut a historic peace deal in the Middle East. This deal, which hopefully will bring about peace and the war in Gaza, is literally one of the most presidential things I've seen him do. For that matter, any one of a number of presidents do. He deserves a great deal of credit for this. And at the same time, we're going to talk about on this show the divisions that are happening here at home that seem to be rupturing into some type of war. Now, those issues are vast, including what we see with bringing troops into inner cities, the potential of raising the Insurrection Act, what we also see by going after political enemies. It's hugely problematic. And I don't want to blame Donald Trump for all of that. I think that both sides share some responsibility in this. Neither one of them seem to be able to bring this country together. We formed a new party in Arizona. It's called the Arizona Independent Party. It was originally formed by No Labels nationally. We're going to be running elections, and we're seeing an outpouring of new candidates who actually want to run. If you are interested in running, you can go ahead and email me at paul@optamerican.com, and we'll respond to you about what you need to do to be able to take part. The bottom line here is that we're going to continue focusing not on who's to blame for the problems. We're going to focus on how it is that we can heal. I'd like to thank you for being with us. If you like the work that we're doing, go ahead and press that subscribe button and let's get this show started.
Destiny. Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. 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 You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon and dissecate and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
All right, so I'd like to welcome my panel here with me today. We're missing Professor Henry Thompson. For those of you that don't know, we have a big storm going on in Arizona. We've had about 1 inch of rain over the last 3 days. We don't quite know what to do when that happens. But in any event, Henry's on his bike, and so being on his bike and the power in Tempe's been knocked out. He's not going to be with us today. But Elliot, that Porsche, that convertible Porsche, does that do okay when you're driving around in this stuff?
It's great. It's great. Yeah, I love it. Those things are made for this type of weather. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't take it out all that often. And I'm going to keep it until the day I can't get, the day I can't get out of it, that's the day I'll sell it.
Oh, I understand that. I have a Tesla and it's about 2 inches away from the ground. And when I have to stand up, it's like I almost need a jack or something to get me out of the seat. Bob, you're back in Phoenix?
I am, and I have a smart car, which doesn't handle this rain nearly as well as Elliot's Corvette.
Yeah, it might float down the, don't go near the Indian Bend Wash. You don't know where you'll end up.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago, this will be lost on some of our younger audience, but I went to a Democratic convention years ago, and somebody had sent an ad over to us that had a Volkswagen floating on the water. And if you guys remember, they talked about that. And it said, if Ted Kennedy drove a Volkswagen, he'd be president today. So, all right. So we're going to get started. And here's what we're going to talk about today. War and peace. Right? Not the Tolstoy version of it. This is kind of the American version of war and peace. And we're going to start with peace. Today, I think it's a big day. I don't think there's any way around that. The president of the United States is on his way to Egypt. They're looking at signing an accord on trying to bring peace to the Middle East. It certainly will be, it's going to have a big effect, not only on the Middle East, but on what's going on in Israel and the Gaza war. Somewhere, I don't know, a month or two after October the 7th, when Gaza or Hamas had gone out and murdered a variety of different Israelis. I was in Israel during that period of time, or at least a few months afterwards. And I remember how horrific that war was, or how horrific that event was. You had everything from people who had been murdered in their kibbutz or in their home. You had women that were raped on being taken back into Gaza. When they got people into Gaza, there was celebration in the street for the people who were beat up and in the backs of pickup trucks. And I knew at the time that Israel was going to respond to it. They just had to respond to it. It's been a 2-year-long war. It's had a big effect, I think, on the world's perception of Israel and the Middle East. But during that period of time, a number of significant things happened. The first thing that happened that was significant is that Israel didn't only focus on Gaza, they focused on Hezbollah. They were successful in being able to go into Syria. And then finally, the raid that took place with them knocking out the airspace in Iran, and then Trump being willing to bomb the nuclear facilities. The point here, I guess, that I'm making is I don't give all the credit to Trump. I think that there's a lot of credit to go around. In fact, I'd go all the way back to Barack Obama, who helped create the Iron Dome. I think that that was important. I certainly think Joe Biden played a role by his willingness to support the Ukrainian war, which occupied the Russians and kept them out of Syria. Israel deserves a huge portion of the credit. But it can't be lost that this is a unique agreement and that, in a way, Trump's unusual style seemed to be very helpful at coming up with this agreement. Now, there are multiple phases of the agreement. I don't think that it's all done. There are some problems that are happening as we're speaking right now, where Hamas is back out murdering people that are opposed to them in the streets of Gaza. But nonetheless, there's a real chance for peace here. And so what I'd like to start the panel by doing is having a discussion of the events that have happened there, and give me your input as to how significant you think this is and whether or not it's going to stick. And Elliot, I'll start with you.
Well, I think this is the most significant event since 1948, quite frankly, since the founding of Israel for them. I thought that it would take hundreds of years for this to be resolved. Yet Trump did it by ignoring the advice of everybody who gave advice in the Middle East for the last 70 some odd years. And he ignored what he did in his first term, but more importantly, what Biden did, what Obama did, and that is to basically keep Israel at bay and not let them fully respond and deal with the issue. Once they dealt with the issue, once they became the strongest SOB in the area and they had American backing, you got to a point where Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and Iran basically were either beaten down or backed down. And that combined with the Abraham Accords and just the desire for the rest of the Middle East not to be drawn into a prolonged conflict is what has allowed us to get here. I think it is groundbreaking. Quite frankly, I think he ought to use the same technique in other areas of the world. But this is startlingly amazing to me that he basically is both feared and trusted by our adversaries and our friends. And that's a unique combination. And I think that's what got us here. If he wasn't so definitive, if he didn't allow Iran to strike the group that was in the Middle East like they have, we wouldn't be here. I'm extremely impressed. Whether it works or not remains to be seen. As you said, Hamas will not go quietly into the night. This isn't the last we've heard from them or other terrorist groups. It remains to be seen. But as a first step, as a start, it is amazing.
I have a more circumspect view of what has been achieved. I think what has been achieved, and it's a significant accomplishment, and Trump was the broker of it, is a ceasefire to facilitate an exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. And as always in these cases, it's very lopsided. You have 20 live hostages exchanged for roughly 2,000 Palestinians, some of which are proven dedicated terrorists committed to the violent destruction of Israel. I think based upon conditions on the ground, the Israeli population was ready for this kind of a ceasefire. and has applauded it quite a bit. And I'm not sure it would have happened without Trump's intervention. Beyond that, I don't think there's any agreement. I don't think Hamas has agreed to disarm. Hamas has not agreed to not participate in the governance of Palestine going forward. I don't think Israel has agreed, certainly not the current government, for the kind of governing structure and international security force that's contemplated by the broader Trump plan for the area. And there isn't a commitment by our Arab allies either to participate in that international security force or to finance the reconstruction of Gaza. So I think we have a ceasefire for a limited purpose. And beyond that, I think everything remains to be seen.
So, Bob, it seems to me that what Donald Trump did is first he met with the Arab world and he came up with an agreement with them in terms of what it was that they were looking for. Then he met with Benjamin Netanyahu, who added 4 or 5 points, many of which people in the Arab world weren't necessarily in support of. And then he presented that almost as a fait accompli to Hamas, saying, here's the deal that we can get. In itself, even if you don't get to the next phase, it seems to me that that approach, what was somewhat genius about it, is that by getting people on both sides bought in, it created a level of pressure on Hamas. Now, it's also not lost on me that Israel had bombed Qatar. They had gone in to take out one of the 3 guys who's made about $11 billion off of Gaza, by being a Hamas agent, but moving into a place where they thought that they were safe. And it's not lost on me that those 2 guys that are left, who have made a lot of money off this war, figured out that they actually could be killed in their home base. So I think Israel played an important role in that. But nonetheless, what Trump did by working this agreement, if nothing else, it did result in getting these hostages released. And I want to talk more about the other portions of that agreement, but I found it somewhat ingenious, his approach to it. How did you see that?
I agree. I give Trump substantial credit and a belief that it probably wouldn't have happened without his intervention, at least at this point in time and in this particular way. And I think the critical contribution he made was in getting Hamas's Arab allies and Muslim allies to put pressure on Hamas to go ahead and release the prisoners or the hostages without an agreement for a full withdrawal by Israel from Gaza, which had been their previous condition to take that step. So I think that Trump's diplomacy put that in place, and that in combination with a desire by the Israel people to have a ceasefire and to get the hostages home, and a belief that additional military action was not producing the incremental gains in security that justified either not getting the hostages back or the continued devastation that was occurring within Gaza. So I think it was the combination of what was happening internally in Israel with Trump's effective diplomacy in getting pressure put on Hamas to go ahead and release all the hostages now. So I believe that his diplomacy was a critical and necessary part of achieving this at this point in time. I will confess that I have trouble understanding what's America first about it. I mean, this is a deep involvement by the United States. We have troops that we have dispatched to Israel. Trump is going to be the titular head of the board that oversees the technocratic group that's supposed to, in the interim, govern Gaza. We are putting ourselves in a position of huge responsibility for what comes next. The plan that exists is not an Israeli-Hamas settlement agreement. This is a Trump-designed framework going forward. So I'm a little bit befuddled about how this fits an America first foreign policy. But I don't think there's any question that Trump's diplomacy got us to the point where we're at. And that's a welcome point to be.
Yeah. And I think, Trump is in a unique position that I don't know that any other president would be in this way. He made the comment, America first is whatever I tell them they are. I think that's how he sees it. I don't think there's another Republican who will come after him that will be able to say that same thing. And that gives him leverage to kind of do what he wants to do, because I think that's how he sees it. But Elliot, what I'd like to do is I'd like to shift a little bit on this. I'm fascinated by what's happening in the overall Middle East. Certainly, for a period of time, there was this theory that Iran was going to become the hegemon. That seemed to be where it was headed. But what we've seen happen lately, with not only the destruction of Hamas to a great degree, what took place with Hezbollah and Lebanon, even the Houthis being hit back by Israel, and then Iran, for the most part, being pushed back, in Syria going through a massive change, is maybe the hegemon today is Israel. I'm not sure that there is a hegemon, but if there is one, I would think that would be the country. Now, we're seeing some pushback on that from Arab allies who are now wanting to have greater arms and support, and some think that that's to try to balance with Israel. But what I'm really interested in is that these Arab nations have moved to a point where they're willing to be supportive of Israel's aims. I'm not sure why that's happening. I think part of it's economic, and I think the economic component to it is this. They have a resource that is a finite resource. They're not going to be able to have the power that they've had from oil in the past years. You see a variety of different places in the Middle East where their economies are beginning to shift away from it. So these petrol dictatorships that existed are becoming more problematic. And certainly in Saudi Arabia, with the Crown Prince, there seems to be a movement towards at least trying to a degree, westernize their economy more. Israel seems to be the best example of how to do that, because they've had to create an economy without oil. Nonetheless, I'd love your thoughts on what you think is taking place with the Arab allies and why it is that they've moved to be in support pretty much here of Israel's aims over Hamas's aims.
Well, it's pretty. The first thing is they got rid of the bad guys. They got rid of the people who were a threat to their way of life. They got rid of Iran. They got rid of Syria. They got rid of Hezbollah. And I agree wholeheartedly with Bob. This isn't over yet, but I think it's moving in a direction that is going to keep Hamas under pressure from the people who would otherwise support them as far as the eye can see. Ultimately, and by the way, last night was a great example. Hamas didn't have to fight Israel, so what'd they do? They fought basically a family that controlled a certain part of Gaza City. Yeah. And so they're not, we haven't heard the last of them, but public opinion is turning against them. The people in Palestine, in the Gaza area, are basically saying, geez, what do these guys do for us? Nothing. Maybe we're better off just dealing with Israel. And the rest of the more stable parts of the Mideast, and stable obviously comes with quotes around it, I think has made the decision that they're better off recognizing Israel and just staying off Israel's radar. And you're right. I think that the strike against the Hamas leadership in Qatar really sent a message to not only Qatar, but Saudi Arabia, to Turkey, that there is no safety for these guys. Israel's going to come after them wherever they are. And I just think that will allow them to focus on the things they need to focus on, which is how to move into the 21st century economy. In some places, how to deal with the rights of their own individuals, their own people, and not have to simply say we hate Israel because they're not us, and maybe they'll start to realize they're better off having partnerships with Israel, because what they were worried about before doesn't exist anymore, except maybe with what's left of Hamas. And I think not having adversaries they're worried about, like Iran, is a big deal for these other countries. I really do. So I think it takes the pressure off them. And Trump, with the Abraham Accords, already started the ball rolling. This, interestingly enough, where I thought it might destroy the Abraham Accords entirely, is, I think, just has strengthened the motivation of these guys to participate.
All right. So, Bob, I want to put that same question to you about what do you think's happening in the Arab world, but I'd like to expand that a little bit. And that is, most young people in the United States, the only thing they know about Israel is what they've watched on TikTok for the last 2 years. I'm really worried that Israel is in a position, at least in Western democracies, where we have a whole generation of people who are growing up who do not see this as being about Israel, as being about the Holocaust, about trying to provide sanction to the Jewish community from persecution, but they're now actually seeing Israel and the Jews as the persecutors because, again, what they're watching on social media. I'm worried about that, and I'm worried about the long-term implications. You think this shifts it in any way, or does Israel still have a big long-term PR battle in front of them?
I don't think it shifts it in any way. And to a very large extent, both in the United States and in Israel, this is being viewed as Trump forcing Netanyahu to do something that Netanyahu really didn't want to do. And putting an end to a destruction in Gaza, the security advances of which seem to be sharply diminishing, and obtaining gathering opposition, both within Israel and internationally. I do believe that there is a serious, to the extent Israel's future depends upon its relationship with the United States. I think the attitude of young Americans is a serious threat to a continuation of the relationship that has been enjoyed heretofore, which makes some of the changes that we've been talking about in the Middle East and Israel's relationship with its neighbors all the more important. If in the future the United States is going to be a less dependable supplier of weaponry and a less reliable defender of Israel in international forums. And I think both of those are very real possibilities.
Well, I think it remains to be seen. I'm afraid Gen Zs are a very unusual group of people. There was a study of their values versus the values that companies value in terms of people they employ, the values they're looking for. And only 2% of Gen Zs had the values that companies are looking for today. Whether that changes over time, and I bring that up only because their view of the world is so different than boomers and Gen X's and millennials. It's like day and night. And I think that's where the issue will come. Hopefully, if this works out and Hamas can be dealt with, controlled, basically, then I think it's something that will take care of itself. If there is another series of uprisings, then I agree that Israel's going to have a tougher time dealing with it. But it depends on what the rest of the Arab world decides to do with these 20 points to make them real. And the only one that I see as a real issue that could blow up the whole thing, and that can happen overnight, is Hamas. Because like I said, they're not going quietly into the night.
So I find this whole PR battle that Israel has to be interesting. Now, I mean, I will start with TikTok, which is it almost doesn't matter what information they put out. What's going to be amplified by TikTok is going to be the anti-Israel side because it's still a Chinese-run company. But in saying that, it's not lost on me that now that they've given back all of the hostages, the only hostage that Hamas has left is Gaza. Gaza's their hostage, right? Mm-hmm. And so what are they doing? Well, today they came out with a security force that is going up, back out on the surface, and they're killing people. There are estimates that I saw today. I don't know this to be true because it's first day and it's first day information, but that they've already killed about 200 people that they saw as being collaborators to try and help make this deal take place. Now, there was a comment supposedly given by Trump. I'm going to put the word supposedly in big highlights, but while he was on Air Force One on the way there, saying, yeah, we kind of knew that this security force was going to be there until we get our own security force. I find that to be kind of fascinating as well. But the point here is Hamas they're just a bad organization. You know, they built hundreds of miles of tunnels, 5,500 different outlets. It's maybe an engineering marvel in terms of what they were able to create. And during the bombing, not one Palestinian citizen was allowed into that to protect them from the bombing. There's so much ammunition against this group. And yet, at least on my feeds, it's just filled with anti-Israel rhetoric. It's constantly showing Israel in a bad light. And I guess my question is, well, twofold. The first one is, do you think that there's any PR way out for Israel on that? And then the second question I would ask is, you made mention of it a few times here, which is Hamas isn't going away. If they don't go away, then the other parts of this agreement fall apart, because that's absolutely key for the agreement to work, which is that Hamas has to be replaced, not rebranded under a different name or organization. They have to go away. They've been indoctrinating their kids for the last 20 years. If you're 19 or 20 years old in that country, about half of the So at the end of the day, unless they're removed, I don't see that we really get any long-term peace.
I agree. And that's why it's going to be interesting to see whether this peace force, these peacekeepers, which will be other Arab nations, what they do. Will they stand up to Hamas or will they not be able to? I do believe that if Hamas gets too far out of control, that Israel's back there. They got to get rid of them. They can't live with these people next door to them, doing what they've been doing at will for the last several decades. And so does that end it? No, but it could delay it. It depends on the reaction of the other Arab countries, whether they will be part of that peacekeeping force. And I think that if Hezbollah keeps on shooting its own people, the people who live in Gaza, sooner or later the press will pick up on it. And sooner or later it will change the nature of the reporting. The best thing that could happen is that the other, this peacekeeping force has to deal with Hamas, and that Israel doesn't. Hamas most likely will attack Israel again, quite frankly. Why? Because they want to piss Israel off and get them back in the fighting because of the PR situation. Is this going to be easy? No. It's great right now, but it's not over, and we don't have enough information to know whether it will be over at this point. Am I optimistic? I am mildly optimistic but it remains to be seen how scared these guys are of Trump. And I'm not talking about Hamas being scared of Trump. I'm talking about the rest of the Arab world saying, we agreed to this. You don't want to cross this guy. And I think that's the only reason we got this far.
So, Bob, on this agreement, one of the things that's interesting to me is it's about as close to a two-state agreement. Or, well, it's about as close to calling for a two-state agreement that I've seen coming from anyone. I find that to be somewhat interesting. I do believe that unless you're able to get a not only a new regime but new values being installed in Gaza, it's problematic. In fact, I will know when we're going to have real peace in Gaza. And here's when it is: the minute a gay bar can survive in Gaza City. I'm 100% sure that will be the point that we know that we can have peace there, because the existing values of the existing group would never allow that to take place. So a couple of questions. First, I had asked Elliot about the issue of where young people are going on this. You had answered that as well. But do you think that this is headed towards a two-state solution, or would you look at it more as being headed towards just this short-term agreement, and then we're just kind of right back to where we are now, maybe 3, 5, 10 years from now?
I do think that the way to view this is as a limited agreement for a ceasefire to facilitate an exchange of hostages and Palestinian prisoners. I don't believe there's been an agreement beyond that. I don't believe that either Hamas or Israel are in agreement with the Trump blueprint. I do not think that the Arab nations who put the pressure on Hamas to release the hostages are committed to the role envisioned for them under the Trump blueprint. I don't think that they are committed to provide the security forces that Elliot mentioned and to take on Hamas. I don't think that they are interested in seeing the Palestinian Authority somehow magically reform itself and be in a position to assume some kind of governing role in all of Palestine. And I believe that there will, regardless of how they're organized or what they call themselves, there will be tens of thousands of Palestinians committed to destroying the state of Israel through violence. And that will manifest itself in some ways. And whether Israel will have confidence in the international security force, if it comes about, to adequately suppress that and to protect Israel, as opposed to Israel, once again, taking action to protect itself, in this time undoubtedly preventative, rather than in response. I don't know. So I think things have changed. So I don't know that we go to the status quo ante, but I also don't believe that we're in the process of fulfilling Trump's framework. I think that what happens in that region remains to be negotiated, and negotiated probably directly between Israel and its Arab neighbors, rather than Trump coming up with a plan and getting everybody to ostensibly agree to it when I don't think they actually do. We did have one bad sign. There's some celebration event that's going to take place in Egypt, and Netanyahu was notably not invited, excluded from it. I don't know. We've been moving towards better relations between Israel and its Arab neighbors for some time. And I think Israel has proven its standing in that region and its importance and its willingness and ability to defend itself. I think that changes the calculation of the Arab countries with respect to them. But I think how that manifests itself is yet to be created or negotiated. It's not going to be simply a matter of implementing Trump's blueprint.
Well, yeah, and I think, Bob, you're absolutely correct. This is not going to be something that is going to happen overnight. They're going to be fits and starts, but this is far more than I would have expected as a result, quite frankly. I thought this would go on for 300 years. The fact that you're actually having people talk about something that might be workable is amazing. Is it likely to happen? Certainly not in its present form. Certainly not as long as Hamas and other bad actors are there to continue to, basically shoot arrows at whoever passes by. But it's a start. And I guess, to me, the glass is half full, and it's got a long way to go before it's full. But we're so farther than I would have expected. I guess my level of optimism is a tad higher than yours.
Yeah, and I would say, I think everything Bob says is right, but where you say it's half full, I think it's 3/4 full. Look, if we could stop the fighting in Russia with Ukraine, and that, even though you might not have an agreement, even though you might not have the details solved, if you can at least get it to stop, you can get it to halt, there's a huge benefit to that. And sometimes those animosities stick around for 20 or 50 or 60 years. Sometimes they dissipate and they go away. But in Israel, the idea that they've stopped fighting, that Israel is no longer going to have to deal with the daily pictures that they're getting their brand completely destroyed by. And I hate to put it that crass of a way, but their brand matters. If we're talking about TikTok and what young kids are seeing and how they're beginning to envision Israel, that's not good for Israel or Western democracy long term. It also gives the ability for the people who are in Palestine to think about, do they want to keep doing this? The people in Gaza, is this what they want to live under? And one recourse they could have is to blame Israel again and just go right back to where they were, which will put it right back to where they were a week ago. On the other hand, maybe they could start taking a look at how much damage Hamas has done to them. I think that the halting of this is beneficial in many ways. I'm going to use this to transition a little bit. And here's the transition. That's our peace portion of our commentary today. I am actually equally worried about the war that I'm seeing that is evolving continually here in the United States. And it is increasingly becoming more divided and more problematic and somewhat going beyond our ability to resolve it through the court system. I don't believe that Americans are as divided as the two political parties want you to believe that they are. I think they're being divided. Now, to be fair, I do not put all of that on Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump instigates it. I think he does a lot of things that he shouldn't do. But I don't see the Democratic Party being a great actor in this either. But even beyond that, it's not just the two parties. The most profitable corporations that exist in America today make their profit off of dividing America, right? The Facebooks and the Twitters and the X's. It is effectively what they do best. And I find it interesting that literally, if you go down and you decide, I heard a commentator say this the other day, that if you go buy a pair of yoga pants and the other guy goes and buys an archery rifle or an archery set, that all of a sudden you start getting different things on your feed to where literally a year later, you're not even watching the same news just from a purchase that you were making. I'm concerned about these divisions, and I want to talk about a series of them that I do think Trump holds more responsibility on. But I want to start with one of the big divisions as we're forming this new political party, the Arizona Independent Party, that I find to be fascinating, is there are a whole group of people who want to be judgmental. They want to figure out who's more to blame for the problem. And my goal, my hope, is to try to focus us on healing. We have enough blame going around by the other two sides. I don't know, maybe that just doesn't work in politics. But before I move on, I'm going to take advantage of my time with both of you just to get your input and see how you view that issue. I'll start with you, Elliot.
Well, I agree with you, and that I don't think the public is as divided as the parties. The fact that the Democratic Party wouldn't even put in something, a temporary stopgap measure to keep the government going, is unconscionable. I really believe that. But there are, and I will also say there is a percentage of the public that that basically either too far right or too far left. My friend who is a tad to the right calls it Trump derangement syndrome. Anything with Trump's name on it is bad, and you get all these with the media. It goes nuts. And on the other hand, somebody who's a little far to the right is going to come up with reasons why the left is wrong. But let me to answer what you say. Most people, I still believe, are either centrist, a little left of center, a little right of center, but the probability distribution is heavily weighted toward the center. And what we're getting in the media and what we're getting from Congress is a probability distribution heavily weighted towards the ends, the tails. And that's a real problem. And a lot of it is the media, and some of it's real. It's very difficult to understand exactly what has to happen to bring everyone together. I'm not sure how it happens.
People who want to blame the left have ample representation. The people on the left who want to blame the right have ample representation. People who want to see government actually govern and address issues in a technocratic fashion, perhaps center left or center right, but don't want to play the blame game. They don't want to play the politics of division. They want government to work and to work better, and they have no representation. And candidates who want to represent that point of view don't have practical paths to get to the general election ballot right now. We've talked about that many times. Paul, nobody in Arizona has done more than to try to create those alternative pathways than you. But that's the problem. And I believe that in a fair fight, that those that want to see a party of governing, a party that isn't interested in the blame game, they're interested in getting stuff done, would win over either the left or the right. But right now, they don't have an opportunity to get to the final decision. So I do believe that there's kind of an even division of political sentiment in all three camps. I don't think it's a bell curve. I don't think that is clustered around the center. But if you look at what's happened in the French presidential elections, I think it's illustrative. You had a center candidate in Macron. You had a far left candidate. You had a far right candidate. But when the far left people were faced with a choice between the centrist and the far right person, they supported the centrist. I believe if it had been the other choice, the centrist against the far left candidate, that those who are in the far right would have supported the centrist. But in the American system, there's just no way to get to that binary choice between a centrist candidate and a candidate from either the extreme left or the extreme right.
All right, so let's pull apart a couple of issues that are top of mind today, just in terms of the divisions that are happening. And I want to start with what's going on in Chicago. On the Chicago issue, in the last session that we had a discussion about how should Democrats respond to this. I'm going to kind of repeat what I had said during that particular episode, which is that my own personal opinion is I don't think the right place for the United States military or National Guard is on the streets of American cities. Now, in saying that, I think progressives have done a terrible job at running cities for a wide variety of different reasons. And if it were up to me and I were trying to navigate the Democratic strategy, I'd say, just go tell the president, look, this is how you want to spend national resources. We'll give you the corners to be on. We'd prefer you not show up with masks. We'd prefer you not show up with M16s. We'd like to see an MP with a handgun on your side instead. But we'll pull out the neighborhoods and we'll walk with you. That's how you want to spend your money. We'll do it. We think that I don't have any doubt the more people you put on the streets, the bigger effect you can have on lowering crime in really tough areas. It rarely is downtown, I might add. Rarely. It's usually really, really hard hit, impoverished neighborhoods where you have big, big problems. And again, if that's how they want to spend their money, my answer would be, that's not how I would spend it. I think you guys have other issues. You might put pressure on local governments to do more, but nonetheless, that's not how I'd spend it. But if you want to, we're going to work with you on that, as opposed to taking the position of, we're going to fight you all the way, which at the end of the day puts Democrats in a camp where they look like they're not supportive of trying to reduce crime. And oh, by the way, at the end of the day, it looks like law is pretty clear on this one. Other than the Posse Comitatus Act, he actually has a right to nationalize the Guard. He actually has a right to do some of the things that he's doing. And now he's talking about declaring the Insurrection Act. Now, let's go the other direction. The other direction on this is he's saying that he's doing this to protect ICE facilities in his filings, to protect the immigration department, to protect federal buildings. But yet everything that he and his administration is saying is that it's about crime. Well, that says to me they're being disingenuous. They're going to send out people and they're not really going to fight crime. They're going to go protect a federal building or protect the ICE divisions, and it's going to do nothing to reduce crime. It'll have almost zero effect. I don't think he really cares about fighting crime. I think he cares about owning the libs. And again, this comes back to me to the issue of I'm not sure how to get these two groups to work with one another without an outside party saying, hey, let's take a different look at this. Let's take a look at how we can pull these sides together, as opposed to what seems to be a continuing evolution of the divisions in this country that could end up in a really bad place. And Bob, I'll start with your thoughts on that.
Well, to me, this is an illustration as a small government conservative of the problem with the Republican Party becoming a populist party. What Trump is doing violates two fundamental small government conservative principles that the armed forces should not be used domestically. I mean, that's a bright line. That was, in fact, one of our complaints in the Declaration of Independence. It goes that far back. And the second is that public safety of the streets, is a state and local issue, not a federal issue. And the answer to it being done incompetently isn't to bring in the feds and have them take it over. It's to elect different officials who will do a better job for the local body politic. And that's happening in some Democratic cities, San Francisco in particular. So irrespective of how it may play out politically, I think we are losing because the Republican Party is abandoning them some core principles that should be bright lines, not only for the right, but those were fundamental principles for the entire country at our founding. And Trump is running roughshod over them.
Yeah, I again, my view is if the Democrats said, "Oh, we'll take you up on the offer," they don't have enough resources to really be involved in fighting crime in different cities throughout the United States. And I would almost make a bet it would be very upsetting to the red states who all of a sudden would recognize they don't want all the resources going to the blue states to be able to solve the problem. Now, that's a very different question than what role should the federal government play, which as a governor or mayor, I don't think you get to make a choice on. I think you can argue about your state's rights, but at the end of the day, we're going to have a court system that's going to make the determination. Elliot, your thoughts on this? I'm really interested in how you see this issue.
Well, I agree that in theory there is no justification at the present time for bringing in troops, federalizing them, and letting them do things that the police should do. On the other hand, I look at the situation where these governments have allowed things to get worse and worse, or if they've gotten better, like when the mayor of Chicago said, we don't have a problem. Yeah, we've gone from 900 murders a year to 600. What's the problem? And you get New York, where you have essentially an out-and-out communist, as far as I'm concerned, running for mayor, and probably is still the front runner. Something is broken. Something is broken. People don't seem to. They didn't take the same civics classes that the three of us took when we were in school, because their view of the world, they have no underlying basic understanding of the principles of a democracy versus versus a socialist state versus a communist state. They have no idea. And so we're going to have to replay all the failures that we've had certainly since the 80s in this country, certainly since Obama, and we're going to replay them over and over. And either what we have is a government that continues to deteriorate, or there's some upheaval where people start to get it. But from what I see, we're not close on either side to getting to that point where you basically have the type of democracy, the type of elected officials that I, for one, was brought up to believe would be created in a democratic system. And I don't have an answer at this point. But when I see the types of mayors that get elected and then reelected, and then their clones get elected after that, in cities that were once great cities, the greatest cities in this country when I was growing up, San Francisco, San Diego, Chicago, these were great cities. And now they're not. They're not. If you live there, you can pound your chest and say, boy, this is a great city. Take a look at what you were and what you are now. But I don't see the indignation of the people in those areas being so great that they're going to do anything about it. So when I see what Trump is doing, I understand where it's coming from. Do I like it? No. Am I concerned about it? Yeah, I am. Am I concerned about the way those cities are going? I'm really concerned about that. I don't have an answer, but it's certainly not leave things alone.
Yeah, so what we watched in Canada was the conservative was going to win in Canada until Donald Trump got involved. And then he raised the nature of nationalistic feelings. And of course, the more liberal person won. I don't like the policies of Mamdani. I think that they are hugely problematic for the people of New York. Hugely problematic. I'm 100% positive about this. Progressive policies are devastating inside cities. Cities, you have to make things work. You got to pick up the garbage. You have to make certain that a police officer arrives in 3.5 minutes, a firefighter in 3.5 minutes. You need to deal with the basics, and you need to be careful about adding too much on top of it. This is a guy who says we had to take over grocery stores. We had to be taxing all the rich, which means all the rich are going to be leaving. They're going to be losing part of their economic base. They're going to be losing part of their financial base. And then they're going to go out and try to do a bunch of stupid programs that have nothing to do with making certain that if you're having a heart attack, somebody comes and picks you up and gets you to a hospital, or that your garbage doesn't sit out on the streets, so you have rats everywhere inside the city. Those problems are going to get worse under him. But here's my answer. The minute Donald Trump gets involved and talks about the national military, he actually will raise in his popularity. And my answer to that is the president should speak up about why he thinks that this is a failure and it's not the right thing, and why they need new leadership. But he should be very cautious about extending over that line. They have had Rudy Giuliani, who kind of went off the rails later on in life, actually did a great job as a mayor in cleaning up the city and getting them to focus on the basics, on the broken glass theory. That wouldn't have happened had a Republican president at the time talked about sending in the national military. He would have created the exact opposite environment. And again, maybe that works well for Trump politically. I don't think it does. I think it's a failure for him politically. But I know it won't work at the local level. If you're the person who wants to be pragmatic and fix the problems, he's harming your campaign. The people who would go out and just do the basics. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit. I'll go back to you on this question, Elliot. I'm also concerned about the policies that are being taken on by ICE. But before I say that, I want to say the following. Again, I think Donald Trump should take a victory lap for what he did at the border. He has taken the problem at the border and it's down to zero. I think he should take a victory lap for that. I also think that ICE is an important organization. There are good people involved in ICE who are doing the job that they're designed to do. I'm deeply worried that when you put a mask on someone, you end up getting reactions that you didn't want. Right? I think it is problematic for them. I also think they're hiring a bunch of new young kids. They're arming them with semi-automatic weapons. They're putting masks on them. We have a little video that I'll show of a priest getting hit in the head by a pepper bag. And it was incredibly damaging. But the worst part was you ended up having the people with the masks on top of the buildings who shot it laughing. Well, I don't know, take the three of us, take us back to 19 years old or 20 years old, put us in that type of position, put a mask on us where we have no accountability, and you're asking for a problem. You just are. The reason that we started saying, hey, we're going to put cameras on police officers, is we wanted to make police officers more accountable. Oh, by the way, 90% of the time we figured out that the police officer was telling the truth by having those cameras on. Higher accountability.
What you're doing, Paul, this is all great in theory. But in fact, these ICE officers, if they didn't have masks on, people would know who they were. They'd be attacked. Their families would be attacked. It's a very dangerous job now. Things that we never thought of as a kid are now taken for granted. These guys are doing that literally to protect their families. I get that because they're not going to be able to protect their families by themselves. So if they become
would you extend that to police officers?
No, I extend. The problem is the governments of those particular cities. That's the problem. And I don't see Americans, again, being so in the level of indignation is so low relative to the quality of what we're getting versus what we used to get that I don't know what the answer is. All I know, would I be an ICE officer if I had a wife and 2 kids at home? No, because somebody's going to get my address and start doing bad stuff. That's just the reality of it. I'm not sure I have the answer, but I know that what's going to happen, the Antifas of the world are going to get even with these guys somehow. And that's unfortunate. It's not something you ever would have thought of when you were growing up. No matter how ticked off you were at a cop, you never would have thought of threatening him or his family. Now it's just taken for granted. And that's so times have changed, unfortunately. And until there's enough respect, and I blame Obama for this, quite frankly, if there's enough respect that people have for police officers and the job they do, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same. It's going to be a very dangerous job, and it's going to be handled differently than the way it used to be handled. And by the way, your comment about the cameras showed that the cop was right most of the time, that doesn't surprise me. But you don't see that on CNN. You don't see that on TikTok. You have to go to the FBI. I had this argument with my daughter when she was growing up, and I'd take her to the FBI. The FBI has a great database on a crime database, and she had these preconceived notions from the internet, and I would take her to the database and show her that her preconceived notions were not a little incorrect. They were totally 100% incorrect. And her only defense was, oh, that's the government numbers. You can't trust those numbers. Well, you can't. That's my problem with this whole discussion, Paul, is that things have changed so much. I don't know the way out. I don't know what it's going to take to get things back to what we consider normal, or has normal changed? And maybe you and Bob can comment on that, but I don't know.
This would be my input into it. If you continue to mask people, and if you continue to not have someone who holds them accountable, which seems to be what's happening today, they will get further out of hand. It's not that they're bad people. There's always a bad group. I would say amongst police officers, it's less than 1%, but 1% can create a lot of damage. All right, they have a gun on their hip. They can take your life. If you don't get a handle on this, it becomes highly problematic. And in the end, if you want to do border enforcement, and if you want to do to make certain that we don't have illegal immigration and that the bad guys are being hauled away, you're not going to be able to continue to do that with making them the aggressors in a way in which they're being seen today by shooting a priest in the head with a beanbag and then laughing about it.
You were the mayor of a very large metropolitan city. How would you have dealt with a situation where your cops are threatened, but you don't want the cops to get out of hand? How would you have dealt with that?
Oh, we had that. We had that happen. I can tell you that the police department, whenever you have a local police department having to deal with local issues, I promise you, even all the way back in the 1990s, you would have neighborhoods or people who would not see police officers necessarily as the good guy, at least the ones who would show up to protest, the people who were mad about Rodney King or that were mad about any one of a number of other things. But the one thing I was always sure of is that if you went out and met with people in those neighborhoods, you found out that the opposite was true, that there were moms having their babies sleep in bathtubs because they were trying to shield them from the line of fire because drive-by shootings were happening in their neighborhood every single night. Businesses who were infuriated by the fact that their business was getting broken into on a nightly basis. You start by organizing them, the people who want something better, the people who are sick and tired of hypodermic needles being left in their yard every night, that homeless people are sleeping in their local park, that their kids are being harassed and they can't let them go out and play. You start by organizing them. The power of being able to operate in a democracy starts at a very local level. I don't really know how you do that with the National Guard. I really don't.
Well, I don't think the National Guard should be there. We're in agreement on that. I'm talking about something more basic. In today's world, I see cities where that's going on and the level of indignation isn't there. He keep on electing the same person over and over again, or the same type of person over and over again. So that indicates to me they don't care.
Yeah, and I would, this is just my input, the idea that elected leaders begin to not only want to defund the police, but they want to malign the police, that's hugely problematic. It's just hugely problematic for them to be able to fight crime in their cities. So part of it is the elected leaders play a role. The things that elected leaders say make a difference. In fact, I think you can look at the rise and fall of great empires throughout the world, and you'll see that the fall of most of them came down to a handful of leaders who acted in an incorrect way.
Yes.
But to lead correctly, it's not a right or left thing. It's just not as simple as the neighborhood's always at fault or the police are always at fault. It's an issue of trying to find What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And then pulling people together to accomplish that vision. Bob, I'll give you a chance to jump in on this one.
I think the problem is with what ICE is doing, which creates both the felt need for masks and the intensity of the protests. If ICE was doing targeted apprehensions of people whom they knew were here illegally and either had committed a crime, serious crime, or been accused of committing a serious crime, I don't think you would have the intensity of the opposition, and you wouldn't have the need for masking. Instead, they are conducting what seem like quasi-dragnet operations, where a platoon of them descends upon some area that has a large number of Hispanics and begin arresting people. And they make lots of mistakes. They've arrested a lot of people who are citizens. They've arrested a lot of people who are legal immigrants. And they do it in an exercise of brutality, which is filmed and communicated to the world. So I think, and I think this is one of the reasons why Trump, despite largely putting an end to illegal immigration at the southern border, is actually underwater in opinion polls on his immigration policies. It's because they've become indiscriminate and brutal.
You know, when you take somebody who's been here, working here for the last 2 or 3 decades, and couldn't get through the system and it's very difficult to get through the system to get for an illegal immigrant. In fact, some people find it almost impossible, no matter how long they've been here. But if these people have been working, paying taxes, contributing society, doing things that certainly Gen Zs aren't going to do, whether it's in hotels or restaurants or housekeeping or whatever it is. And you're throwing dragnets for those people. Those people are now afraid to go to work. There's something wrong. I absolutely agree with that. But our immigration policy is so screwed up and has been screwed up for so long, and there's been so little done about how you deal with it that I'm not sure what you do. I know the last time that Reagan dealt with it, he just said, everybody who's in the country as of X date, you're in. And how do you, I don't know what the answer is, but there's got to be a starting point, and we are not even discussing it. We're not discussing the fact that we're gonna be a country where there's more deaths than births, and we're gonna need labor even with AI, and so the baby is getting thrown out with the bathwater, and that's unfortunate.
Elliot, I'll ask you this before I'll move to the next point. It seems to me that we're in this position where we're seeing a variety of things happen. I look at agriculture today. You guys know that my family come from Prescott, and they're connected to a lot of rural Arizona. My dad had a small ranch up in Prescott, Arizona. But what is not lost on me is that we have this immigration policy today that's going to put us for the first time in a position where we have zero growth. And at the exact same time, farmers and ranchers are facing these tariffs, which are having huge impacts on them. Clearly, the soybeans and the cattle that used to come from the United States and go to places like China and other places are now, in the last few months, coming from Argentina. So in a world where agriculture was at least a third of agriculture was based upon exports, they have no growth going on there. And now they're going to, not only no growth, they're going to see shrinkage. And in the United States, they're seeing shrinkage as well. I think long-term, agriculture is in big trouble in this country. And I don't know if that's symptomatic of what's going to happen in other industries or if that's just unique to agriculture. But labor there plays a huge role because, as you said a moment ago, there's no way to get American kids to go do the jobs that exist on these farms. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the things right now you're seeing the unemployment rate's still relatively low and with very little employment growth. And that's because there's no labor out there. And that is ultimately going to be a problem. We'll go to the AI discussion later. But other things being equal, it's going to be a problem going forward for most of the service industry and some of the manufacturing industry. And it's time for these guys, the Republicans and the Democrats, to sit down and come up with a cohesive policy where we have sufficient labor going forward. That doesn't mean letting people in indiscriminately, but it means if you've got a skill and there's a job for that skill, you know, let's sit down and talk. We got a deal here. That will change a little with AI, but will it change entirely? Not likely. So the whole immigration system is broken, and its effects are going to be ubiquitous throughout the economy in terms of being able to get labor to do things effectively. It's a mess, and nobody's even really discussing it.
Yeah, it ought to be more intentional, in my opinion. I'm a merit-based guy. But, Bob, I don't know if you saw the Hegseth speech that he did to the military generals. I wanted to get your idea on that. In one part of the speech, we'll play a clip of this in a moment, but in one part of the speech, you know, he talks about the importance of being able to demobilize, to hunt and to kill our enemies. It was very much kind of a pro-warrior ethos speech. There were portions of the speech that I didn't agree with, but I kind of agree with the idea that our military shouldn't be a place where our cultural wars are being fought out. We need to have the most lethal military in the entire world. But right after that, Trump came on, which, by the way, wasn't planned, I think. I think they changed it in the last couple of days beforehand. But in Trump's speech, he turned all of that to being focused on the enemy from within. And all of a sudden, when you reframe those words of Hegseth, they become much more terrifying because we're not talking about utilizing those concepts to go after people around the world. We're potentially talking about how to utilize those concepts to go about getting Americans.
We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters. That's all I ever wanted as a platoon leader. And it's all my E6 squad leaders ever wanted, back to that E6 rule. We let our leaders fight their formations, and then we have their back.
I don't know if you watched it or if you had any thoughts about it, but I'd love your input.
There are those on the never Trump right who believe that Trump is trying to normalize the presence of armed military forces in our cities. And I don't think that's a far-fetched worry. While I agree about exorcising wokeness in the military, I accept that it became too prevalent under Obama and Biden. You don't need to give a lecture about a warrior mentality to the top generals and combat commanders around the world. They don't need to get the lecture. Hegseth is just so thoroughly outside his realm of competence. He's got the largest agency in the world to manage, and he's given a bunch of generals, people who have significantly more combat experience than he has, lectures about being tough. And Trump's appearance in speech was wholly inappropriate and potentially scary in saying that it is the job of the military to deal with the enemy within. And particularly given how he's defined that. I mean, he's defined George Soros's nonprofit groups as an example of the enemy within. He's identified Act Blue, a software that designates contributions to Democratic candidates as part of the enemy within. And this gets back to the fundamental principle that our military should not be involved in domestic affairs as a line that Trump does not respect. I have to give the mandatory assembled military leaders enormous credit for sitting silently through a immature lecture to a bunch of true combat veterans about military toughness and a wholly inappropriate speech, political speech, by the commander of chief, and remaining completely stoic and impassive. They remain the best that the country has.
Oh, no doubt about it. And I'll just give this input. I don't know military minds all that well. I've had a number of friends that are generals, and I've worked with a number of people on it, but I didn't grow up in that culture, so I don't really understand it. But I know politicians. I will make you a guarantee. Today, the top of the heap in the Republican Party is J.D. Vance, and right behind him is Marco Rubio. Politicians, people who aspire in politics to be able to run for office, they don't believe in an established order. And I guarantee you that was a presidential speech. That was not geared towards the people in front of him. That was geared towards the people on the outside of them. He is trying to set up his race for president. All of them are in this thought process of the end of this term, Trump goes away. He's not going to be the president, which I can't wait to watch how that happens, because he might wait until the last day before the November election before he says it. But in any event, they're jockeying. They're jockeying for a position, and that's what that was. And again, like I said, I don't know generals, but I know politicians. But that was.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I felt the same way. It wasn't geared at that for that 800 people in there. They knew all that. This was geared for a different group, whether it was the public or whether it was our enemies, to say, you know what, we're getting down to business. Our job is to win wars, period. Thank you very much. We don't care how we do it, but we're going to do it. It wasn't aimed at the 800 people there, whoever it was. It was
how irresponsible to commandeer all of our military brass to serve as political props.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
All right. So, Bob, I'm going to change the last subject here. You wrote a column about the change in the gubernatorial primary on the Republican side with David Schweikert entering into the race. So let's just talk a little bit about local politics before we go on, being I have a local party here now. But tell me what your thoughts were on that.
Well, Schweikert entered the race. He's running against two Trump-endorsed candidates, and Andy Biggs and Karen Taylor Robeson. And he said he wanted to run as the true conservative, the traditional conservative. And clearly his theory of the race is that Robeson and Biggs divide up the MAGA vote. He takes the traditional conservative vote. And he gets enough MAGA people either to recommit to their Reagan conservative history or to make a pragmatic judgment that one of Schweikert's other pitches is he's someone who's won in contested primaries. He can get the independents, so he's more electable than the other two. Enough MAGA people to make a tactical decision rather than vote for the purest MAGA candidate, which has been the history in the last 3 election cycles of what the Republican electorate, primary electorate, does. I don't think all of that adds up to a plurality. And I also think that Schweikert is a highly compromised advocate in terms of returning the Republican Party to its Reagan conservative roots. Most significantly because of his complicity in the plot to keep Trump in office after 2020 when he lost to Biden in the election by voting not to accept Pennsylvania's electoral college votes, but also his silence as Trump has run roughshod over the conservative principles that we've been talking about. He's now kind of finding his voice a little bit on that. Now that he's a gubernatorial candidate, he said in an interview that he does object to Trump taking shares in private companies in exchange for government approvals or grants. He has established himself as supporting free market principles. And if he were to run on an Arizona-specific agenda, he might have something to contribute. But he begins that effort, I think, severely compromised.
Yeah, and, as a disclosure, I've known David literally since I ran my first time when I was 23 or 24. He was running at the same time, and I actually like him. I also know Karen fairly well, and I like Karen. It's not lost on me. Well, I'll make a $10 bet here, maybe a luncheon bet amongst us, which is David ends up getting an offer from the Trump administration to go to work for them. I don't know that he'll take it. I don't have any inside information, but that's my bet. One of the other two are going to find that they're going to lose votes from this. I'm not certain which one's going to lose more, but they both have Trump's ear to a degree, and one of them has leverage over Trump, which is as votes inside the existing House until that's done. So again, I don't know that David would take it, but I would not be at all surprised to see that happens. So my question to you, Bob, is which one do you think it hurts more? Do you think it hurts Karen more? Or does it hurt Andy Biggs more?
I think it hurts Robeson more because her theory of the race has seemed to be that she can run pure MAGA. She can go hard after the Trump endorsement. She can run on a pure MAGA platform. And right now, both her and Biggs's public communications are all hail to the chief. Trump can do no wrong. Vote for me because I'm going to implement Trump's policies in Arizona. But she's always been regarded as more of a traditional Republican. And her theory of the race, both in 2022 and it appears in 2026, is that somehow a fairly substantial number of Reagan conservatives who continue to be part of the Republican Party primary electorate will intuit that she's preferable because she's not really as pure MAGA as she seems, and the other person really is pure MAGA. That didn't work against Kari Lake. Andy Biggs is not a good campaigner. He's not a good candidate. So she might have had a chance to maybe make that work better against Biggs than it worked against Lake. But with Schweikert explicitly running in that lane, which could have been her lane, and making an explicit appeal to that remnant of Republican Reagan conservatives, I think it's more difficult for her to sort of campaign this way, but still get the support of people who aren't really excited about the MAGA movement or are in opposition to it. So I think marginally it makes it more difficult for her compared to Biggs.
Elliot, any thoughts?
Not really. It's so difficult for me to believe a state like Arizona is having the same problems as a lot of places where the candidates on the surface seem fine, but you think they'd figure it out and not let somebody who they disagree with end up winning the office because they were so busy beating the hell out of each other. That's what happened in 2022, and I'm afraid that's what's going to happen again in 2026. It's frustrating, and I think any one of the Republicans could beat a Democrat, but I think that by the time there's three of them that are going to just pound each other, and I don't have. I'm just rambling now. I don't have an opinion.
Yeah, that's okay. My view of it is, again, I know two of them, and I genuinely like both of them. I think Karen had a huge potential, just as Bob has said, which is to run kind of in that Reagan lane. She went through that issue with her last opponent, didn't get Trump's endorsement, and I think she overlearned the lesson. The idea that she has his endorsement, shouldn't have prohibited her from still being able to reach out to that group of voters. I think in Arizona, if you were really talking to Republicans, they're at least split on whether they see themselves more as a Reagan Republican or as a Trump Republican. Both of them have kind of their supporters, but I think she could have taken some of the Trump vote and at the same time been able to appeal to that group of voters. And I think that David entering into the race has done that. Okay, last issue. This is kind of the bonus question. So Kamala Harris wrote her book, 107 Days. I don't know if any of you guys have read it. I tried to. I was in one of my book clubs. I've read it, and then I'd skip a chapter, and then I'd read the next one. I don't usually admit to that. But, oh my God, was it filled with victimhood. I mean, I got done reading this book, and the only thing that I came away with, and again, I didn't read it all, to be honest with you. I tried to, but I just couldn't get through it. She found a way to blame everybody else for her problems, ignoring the fact that she raised $1.5 billion, ignoring the fact that she had millions of volunteers across the country, blaming Joe Biden because he only gave her 107 days. Even the title kind of is a victim strategy, right? I only had 107 days. She'd had a better vice president, all but for the American public who weren't ready to accept it at this point in time. And I was hoping for something better. I was hoping to get something that would say, hey, here's why we lost and what we should have learned from that election. And that is not what you're going to get if you read that book. I don't know if any of you have, can't imagine that either one of you have read it, but you definitely get bonus points if you did. Elliot?
No, but what you're describing is something that I would have exactly expected, judging by the way she ran her campaign. So, again, I did not read it. I didn't skip every other chapter. I just skipped them all. But she, what you're describing is the way she ran her campaign. Poor me.
I'll tell you what I left convinced of, 100% convinced of. We need to reconcile in this country. We need to find a way to heal. And these two parties can't do it. Right. They just can't do it. And it is definitely not going to come from whatever the Kamala Harris portion of the party is. Bob, I'll give you last comment.
Well, I have read excerpts and news coverage of it. And I actually thought she ran a decent campaign with the hand that she was dealt. However, in American politics, it's often sufficient just to be the other guy. and people were not prepared to give an extension to the Joe Biden administration. They were ready for a new direction, and I don't think it mattered what length of time she had or what she did. That was what decided the matter. It was no more of the Biden administration. We need to go in a different direction. And I think the same thing is going to be partially true in 2026 and 2028. Irrespective of what the Democrats do or don't do, or Republicans do or don't do, those are likely to be referenda on the Trump administration and his management of the national government.
Yeah, and you know, you may be right. She may not have had any chance in this because it was maybe time for the other guy. But what I saw in watching her campaign, and what she really did not do a great job of addressing in the book, was the opportunities that they had that they blew. One of the opportunities was the big question that she was asked, okay, what would you do differently? And the idea that she had no response for that was pathetic. And added on top of it, how hard would it be to see that immigration was the single biggest issue at that time? And she could have used that as an ability to say, look, I had a front row seat to see the mistakes that we made. And there are things that I would do differently. And here's what I would do. And if the answer is, well, I can't do that because I might hurt my old boss, don't run. Get somebody else to be in the position if you can't do that. The second thing that I saw with her that I thought was a grave mistake was the inability. It was obvious she was hiding constantly. She was trying to avoid long-form types of medias. You know, when Trump did the long-form podcast on Joe Rogan, which I think it was like 77 million views. It's an unbelievable amount of views that he got from it. I listened to the whole thing. The one thing that he did is he was convincing that he wasn't a nut job. And there were a lot of people that thought that he was a nut job. Now, I don't know, maybe he just had a good 2.5 hours of being normal. But nonetheless, he did a pretty good job on that show of doing that. And I left it being convinced that there were going to be a number of people that listened to that said, he's not as bad as everybody's saying. He's not as bad as the media is portraying, because he sounded reasonable. In fact, there are a lot of things that he said in that podcast that he's not living up to. There are a lot of things that he said in that podcast that, he said, I'm going to end this whole lawfare thing that's happening and try to make certain that we never do that again. Well, that's not really what we're seeing. We're seeing something quite the opposite. But to be fair to him, she wouldn't do it. She was offered to be on that show as well, and she would have had a number of people that listen. I think where Democrats are stuck, this is what I personally believe. They have a core constituency in their base that they know is way out of line with the general election voter. And if they go into long-form content, they end up being put in this position where they either have to oppose their base or they have to oppose the mainstream voter. And they prefer not to do either. Trump, on the other hand, if you listen to his interview, you may not like him, but he was appealing to mainstream voters. He did again, you go back and listen to it. If you were focused on that portion of the public, he did a great job. That's a lesson Democrats ought to learn. They have a problem with their existing base. And if they don't find a way to shuck that, I don't see how they have a chance. In fact, I'm starting to believe this to be true. What we're doing with this independent party, we're really the mainstream party, and the Democratic Party is just a spoiler at this point. They're the ones in the way. I don't think they can win. I think they're in a problematic position, but we'll see. All right, guys. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Take care.
Good to be with you.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.